And besides the fact that Purim is a Geulah, Purim is one of the sort of Geulah celebrations throughout our history. Pesach is one, and Purim is another, Chanukah is another, and then eventually we'll have the celebration of going out of this Golus. But besides that, there's something even more specific, and also how it relates very much to the time that we're in now. So I want to begin with a question. We learned in the classes regarding the Shir Geulah that, not Shir, regarding the class of a Purim, about Amalek, that Amalek represents two things. One is doubt. In other words, there's a certain klipa that puts doubts in a person's mind. Doubting, whether it's doubting Hashem, whether it's doubting the Navi, whether it's doubting Tzaddikim, doubting how authentic Torah is. Any thought that doubts something which is in Torah, that's coming from the klipa of Amalek, which means it's not a kind of a Yetzer Hara that tells me to violate something or don't follow something. Just says, are you sure? Maybe there's a possibility that it's not exactly that way. That kind of thought is Amalek. And the second thing is Kurirus, coldness. We go down what it says, L'chumish asher karcha, he made you cold. And Rashi explains that the whole world was in awe of Hashem, in awe of the Bnei Yisrael, that here they were in Mitzrayim, who was the superpower of that generation, and the whole world was melting with fear when they heard what happened to Egypt. And to the extent that even 40 years later, when they had to go into Eretz Yisrael, they were still overcome with fear. So the fact that Amalek, only a few days after all these miracles happened, went and attacked, their sole purpose was to cool people off, to take away from that enthusiasm, from that excitement, from that awe of Hashem and awe of Bnei Yisrael. So basically, Purim is getting rid of Amalek. But my question is, where do we see in the story of Purim that it's related to doubt or it's related to coldness? Whenever it says in Chassidus that there's a spiritual significance to a holiday, but you always find the parallel between the spiritual significance and what happened physically. Like, for example, when we talk about Pesach, so Chassidus explains, Adar explains this in Tanya, that the Yetzias Mitzrayim on a personal level means that we have a Nefesh Elokis. The Nefesh Elokis is restricted and confined by the Nefesh Abamis and the Guf, and doesn't let the Nefesh Elokis function the way it wants to. So we have to free ourselves from that and bring the Nefesh Elokis to live up to its real standards, what it really is all about, and have love for Hashem and fear of Hashem and do mitzvahs the way it wants, going out of my personal limitations. But that's a reflection of what happened physically. They didn't wear Mitzrayim. And in Mitzrayim, they were also restricted and confined physically. And Yetzias Mitzrayim means going out of that confinement, going out of that bondage, and going out of that limitation. So we can see the parallel between the spiritual Yetzias Mitzrayim and the physical. Or when it comes to Chanukah, Chassidus explains, we learned about it when we were celebrating Chanukah this year, that the klipa of Yevonim was about taking away the holiness of Torah, which means they didn't mind that people studied Torah. They didn't mind that people were intellectual and studied Torah like any other intellectual pursuit. And that would be fine. But the fact that you study Torah like something which is godly, and you approach the Torah with holiness and godliness, that's what they were against. So in the story of Chanukah, it also, you see it. Where do you see it? The fact that they didn't destroy the Beis HaMikdash like the other times. They just made everything tamei, the Gemara said, made everything impure. So what happened physically is a reflection of what we're supposed to do spiritually. And therefore, when it comes to Purim, we also ask the question, where do we see in the story of Purim, which is about defeating Amalek, that there was something about doubt or something about coldness. Where do we see that? So there's a mimer from the Frierdiker Rebbe, which I guess must be based on a certain medrash, that explains Purim in a way that you don't really find it so clear. I mean, certain details, yes, but not everything. Let me give an introduction. The introduction is that really what happened in Purim was that when he's going into the reason, why was there a decree? In other words, of course, Haman was wicked, he was evil, and he had his intentions, but it wasn't all about Haman. It was all about the heavenly court ruled that Chas v'shalom, this has to happen to the Yidden. And the question is, what did they do that they deserve such a punishment? A punishment which calls for, God forbid, total annihilation of the whole nation. Different answers are given, but this is the one answer. But in order to understand this answer, I need to show you something. Look in the booklet, page 22A and 22B. First, let's look at 22A. This is from a book which is called, it's basically a timeline of history, Jewish history. Very good. That gives you a bird's eye view of how history evolved. So it describes how the Yidden lived in Eretz Yisrael and then how things deteriorated. And look at where it says Jewish year 3319. The English there was 442, meaning before the Common Era, 442. In Hebrew, it's 3319. What does it say? Yerushalayim was conquered, and Yoakim was the king. He was exiled. Where? To Babylon, Babylon. So the Yidden understood that Yerushalayim was conquered. That's the beginning of Golus. And the Navi promised them that this will only be for 70 years. And after the 70 years are over, they're going back. Let's turn the page. They counted from that point 70 years. And then comes to the year 3390, which is approximately 70 years later. Zerubbabel led the return to Eretz Yisrael. Oh, so, okay, we saw the fulfillment of that prophecy, that 70 years later, the Jews went out and they went to Eretz Yisrael. But then it says, a year later, the building of the second Beis HaMikdash began and halted. They began building it, and then there are certain people came to the king and said, the Jews are building a Beis HaMikdash. Do you realize what it means? They're going to become independent, they're going to rebel against you, and they're going to make their own kingdom. So the king ordered they should stop building the Beis HaMikdash. So first it looked like, oh, we're going out of Golus. And then they realized, no, we're still in Golus. At that time, it wasn't Babylon anymore. It went over to the hands of the Persians. The Persians conquered Babylon. But still, it was, they were controlling Yidden. They didn't allow them to build a Beis HaMikdash. As a result of that, Yidden started to think that apparently this prophecy about going out of Golus after 7 years is just not happening. And that's what led to their downfall. So let's look inside. This is a mimer of the Frierdiker Rebbe. It was actually written in Yiddish. And this is the Hebrew translation. There's also an English translation, which is printed in a book called Hasidic Discourses. The Frierdiker Rebbe's Maimarim in English. So this mimer is talking about like what happened in the times of Haman. What did the Yidden do that because of that they deserved such a punishment? So I'm going to start from the middle. The first word in the paragraph is the word Hadeya. It's about the middle of the page. Hadeya Ashniya, second opinion. It is on page 21. Hadeya Hashniya, the second opinion, is what caused this decree. Kiruv Adas, the closeness. Shahaya ben Bnei Yisrael Parsian. The Yidden got very close with the Persians. Hababalium with the Babylonians. Vahamidoyim. These are the people of Madai. These are the three main nations at the time. Bnei Yisrael Yikroivim L'Malchus. They also had contacts with people that were in government, political connections. The Nenu Mahasudes Atrefas, and used to enjoy the meals and the parties that were treif. So basically, they were mingling with the non-Jews, and they were sort of assimilating. And this brought them this rachik mit Torah mitzvahs, to distance themselves from Torah mitzvahs. A mispah shanan of Fnei Geulah Megalas Bavel, a few years before the actual Geulah of Galas Bavel, Heichel HaSatan, Rachman al-Islan, LaHasis Uladiach, as Bnei Yisrael began to incite Bnei Yisrael Ulachtiam, and make them sin. Why did he do that? Kavanas HaSatan, the Satan is always looking to make things not work out, and there should be more Averis. So he wanted Lachtim of Bnei Yisrael, they should sin. So Hashem will continue to keep them in Golus, Chas v'shalom. So actually, as the Geulah was coming, that's when he made more of an effort. How can I mislead them? How can I get them to deviate so they'll never go out of Golus? Bnei Yisrael, lo yuchlu lamed b'nisyanis, they couldn't stand up to these tests. And they began to lead a life, chofshiyim, a free life, without Torah mitzvahs. Mordechai HaTzadik, and some people from the Sanhedrin, their words, lo yashpiyu, had no influence on them. In other words, they were telling people, stop doing what you're doing and straighten things out, but they didn't respond. Not only that, nimtzu azei panim, there were certain people with tremendous chutzpah that they stood up against Mordechai and the people of Sanhedrin. Who were these people? These were people who were leaders in this assimilation movement. So Mordechai and the Sanhedrin called out to the Yidden to do tshuva. And they encouraged them by telling them that Moshiach, the Geulah, is coming very soon. And nevertheless, these people made fun, and they wouldn't let the Yidden, they convinced the Yidden not to listen to them. Let's turn the page. And it says, Ayidei Halag, through them laughing and ridiculing the idea of Geulah. They were telling them, what kind of Geulah? Look what's happening. We're in this Golus, we're here so many years. And of course, we were promised to be out of here by 70 years, and it's not happening. So the fact that they made fun, they were ridiculing the call of Mordechai and the Sanhedrin about Geulah and about Shuvah, Gomu Azei Haponim, these chutzpahdik people, who are really shluchim of the Satan, they caused doubts in the hearts of Yidden, hearts of good Jews. Up until then, they believed in Geulah. But when they heard the words of ridicule from these leaders who had the chutzpah to stand up and make fun of someone like Mordechai, they were affected by that. And not only that, besides Mordechai and just a few selected people from the Sanhedrin, even the Sanhedrin itself didn't stand and sort of support what Mordechai was saying. And a lot of them were just being quiet. They didn't speak about Geulah. Why? He explains, they couldn't say the Geulah is not coming, chas v'shalom. They believe that it's going to come. It's a prophecy. These were people in Sanhedrin, they surely believed. But they didn't know when. They didn't know what to tell the Jews. It was supposed to happen. The time went, and it didn't happen. What now? So they didn't know how to answer that and what to say to them. And they also didn't believe that Mordechai knows. So they decided better is to be quiet and just don't talk about it at all. Now the question is that a good approach? Not talking about something, you're not doing any harm. That's not true. When you don't talk about it, you are doing harm. Why? In addition to the fact that by them being quiet, Nasnu b'derech meila, indirectly they gave tremendous strength, the manhigim arayim, to the bad leaders, shluchei Abaldova, who were the agents of the Satan. They're the ones that ridiculed and insulted Mordechai and the Sanhedrin, made fun of them, that they're talking about Geulah. And that brought the Yidden to do more Averis, with eating treif and desecrating Shabbos and desecrating the holidays and intermarriage with Goyim, and it just continued to bring more and more mingling between Yidden and the non-Jews. So the fact that these people were quiet, that made the doubts even stronger regarding Geulah. In other words, people who believed in Geulah before, now they really had a basis of that because nobody else is saying anything, only Mordechai. How come the other great people aren't saying something? And the fact that they had these doubts had affected the Jews in two ways. Chelik mebnei Yisrael, one segment of the Jews, they became very far. Me'amunas agula v'terem mitzvahs. Not only they lost their faith in Moshiach, in Geulah, they lost their faith in Torah mitzvahs. It's like, I guess you say, if you can't beat him, join him. We're stuck here in Gullus forever. Let's just be like everybody else and go with the flow. Why should we be different? Then there was another group that in certain areas they still remained observant of Torah mitzvahs, but they had doubts about Geulah. And in certain ways, they became close to those people, those leaders that were actually making fun of Geulah and denied Geulah. And that's how the Yidden was sinking lower and lower, and eventually that's what led to the decree because of the assimilation. So the main thing that Mordechai tried to give them hope was that the Geulah is going to come, and it's going to come soon. In fact, it's interesting. It says that Mordechai Haman was very upset about the fact that the Yidden is still learning Torah, and he heard that Mordechai gathered 24,000 children, 22,000 children, learning with them. So he went to see what's going on. What was he learning with them? What subject? What? He was learning with them a subject of how to do certain procedures in the Beis HaMikdash. Here, this person's talking about total annihilation, and everybody's saying it's over. And what is he learning about? Soon we're going to be out, we'll be in the Beis HaMikdash. Let's learn about the Beis HaMikdash. Which means that by doing that, he showed him that we're totally defying you and all your scares and everything. And this made him very angry. But on the other hand, for Hashem, this did the opposite. This is when Hashem heard the voices of the children learning Torah, especially learning about the Beis HaMikdash. It showed him how much the Yidden had believed. That turned the decree around. So we see, basically, when you know this part of the story, you see, yes, that was the klipa at that time, coldness and doubt. Again, there were those people who had more than doubt. They just denied the whole thing. But what they caused by most of the Jews who were really observant of Torah, observant of mitzvahs, that they should have doubt. And doubt in Geulah as it was in those days. So what was really the story? It was 70 years and nothing happened. How could it be that the prophecy wasn't fulfilled? So if you go back to that page, 22a, you see it says, I pointed before to 33:19. Then it says Yerushalayim was conquered again, 33:27. Yirmiyahu persisted in prophesizing calamity, 33:32. Yecheskel prophesied in exile. So there were already prophets that were taken away in exile. The first stage of exile is where they took prominent people, the Nevi'im and the leaders, and they didn't take everybody, just certain people. And then 33:36 was the final siege of Yerushalayim. The walls of Yerushalayim were penetrated. The sacrifices ceased in Beit HaMikdash, and the first Beit HaMikdash was destroyed. When you turn the page, you see that in the year 3406, 3408, that's when Purim happened and the second Beit HaMikdash was built. And that's exactly 70 years. But not 70 years from the earlier date, 70 years from the later date, and that's when they made a mistake. They were counting 70 years from when Yerushalayim was conquered the first time, but the Beis HaMikdash wasn't destroyed yet. But if you count from when the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed, the final siege of Yerushalayim, so 33:38 till the year 3408 is 70 years. I hope so. Yeah, I think it is. So that's the story with Purim, and that's the story with the doubt and the coldness. It became cold to Torah mitzvahs. But we also see another thing from this story. One of the things that put doubts in people's head today is that when the Rebbe spoke about Moshiach coming and it's happening imminently, this was over 30 years ago. And the truth is there were tremendous miracles happening then. But now we're seeing a lot of other things happening, and especially if you think of October 7th. When you think of October 7th, one thing is you can't deny is that everybody says that this is the worst thing that ever happened to the Yidden since the Holocaust. So how does it make sense that here we're saying that we're almost up to Geulah, and then the worst thing that ever happened should happen? So it's just important to point out that the same thing was here with Purim. The worst decree in history ever was the decree of Haman. Why is that? Because all other decrees, let's say Mitzrayim, they didn't decree to kill all the Jews. They were slaves. They were working hard, but it wasn't a decree to kill them. And when they were in Geulah and Babylon, also wasn't to kill them. They were taken away as slaves, and they were being sort of controlled. And even if they were being, forced to do certain things, but they still allowed them to live. And even in later generations, when there were many times when Jews were in the crisis where in Spain, and France, and Italy, and Russia, and Poland, where there was also danger, in most times the danger was that country, but not other countries. So the Gemara says that one of the things that Hashem did, kindness for Yidden, is that he spread them all over the world, so that when there's a decree for Jews in one place, they can continue in another place. So there never was a time where every single Jew, his life was being threatened. The only time was Purim. That every man, what does it say in the Megillah? Every man, every woman, every child, Chas v'Shalom, should be annihilated. And if that's how could it be that right after the story of Purim, the Beis Hamikdash was built? That means they were so close to Geulah. How could it be that so close to Geulah, this should be the worst kind of decree that ever happened? So we see that this is sometimes the way it is. That Dafka before the Beis Hamikdash was going to be built, that was the darkest time, and Yidden were losing their faith, and Mordechai was strengthening them that not to be discouraged and to realize this is the Satan making his last ditch effort that we shouldn't go out of Golus, and it's not Chas v'Shalom because we're far away from it. The same thing is here with us. Okay, so maybe if we have a few more minutes, we'll continue and explain some other things about Purim. Something which we didn't do in the class on Purim would be, if you look at like I mentioned before, if you look at the list on page 1, number 11, in the Chumash, Yom Kippur is called Yom Kippurim. I think I might have a copy of that from the Chumash here. Yom Kippurim, Day of Atonement. Let's see if we have it here. I'm not sure. Yeah. Look at page 31. Pasuk 27 and 28, but mainly 28. And all the work on that day for it is a day of atonement. But what does it say in Hebrew? Ki Yom Kippurim. So the Zohar says, you know what Kippurim means? It's a day like Purim. On the surface, Yom Kippur is like Purim. There couldn't be two opposite days in the calendar than Yom Kippur and Purim. Yom Kippur is a day that's even more than Shabbos. There's no eating, there's no drinking, you don't get involved in anything. Gashmias, it's a totally spiritual day. And Purim is the opposite. Purim is eating and drinking a suda and food and rejoicing, and that's not what you do on Purim. So why does it say Yom Kippurim? And in general, where do we even see any kind of similarity between Purim and Yom Kippur? So the answer to that is, where do we see a similarity? Is, turn to page 32. One of the main things that were done on Yom Kippur was the Nasan, it's underlined on page 32. And Aaron shall put lots upon the two goats. One lot goes to Hashem, which means that it's supposed to be a carbon, and the other one is La'azazel. So this was a major part of the Avodah on Yom Kippur. There were two goats, and the Kohen Gadol put his hand into the choose with the right hand and left hand, and one of the goats was taking for this, one for the other. So, and if you look at the psukim that follow, it's all about Geulah, it's all about the drawing of lots. So the drawing of lots is a major part of Yom Kippur. It's also a major part of Purim. In fact, it's one of the questions about Purim is, what does Purim mean? Why is it called Purim?
I don't know.
Right, it says in the Megillah, it's called Purim because in their language, it means drawing of lots. So it's almost like saying, let's call the Yontiv horse because it says that Haman was riding on a horse. I mean, it's drawing of lots. It's a little detail. It should be something about Esther, about Mordechai, about redemption. Drawing of lots was just Haman in his initial part of the attack was choosing a day. That's all. Why should the whole Yontiv be called Purim? So the answer is, obviously, the drawing of lots is a very big spiritual thing, and it applies to Purim and it applies to Yom Kippur. We find it again in davening. It's also a very famous song. Page 33, these words became a very famous song, where we say, Ashreinu matei chalkeinu, umanoim geiraleinu. Ashreinu means how fortunate we are, how good is our portion, and how pleasant is our lot. What's the lot that we're talking about? What is the lot? As if Hashem drew lots and he chose us. Again, it's a broad subject of Siddur, but just to get the general idea, that like everything else, it's a metaphor for a certain idea. And that is that there are two ways to choose something. In other words, if you have to choose a person for a certain job, you make an assessment. This person has certain talents, has certain gifts. They're capable in this area. They have certain weaknesses. And I'm thinking between these two people, who should I choose for this job? Who's more suitable for this job? Based on their talents, based on their intellectual, emotional capacity, this person is more suitable to be the general in the army, more suitable than that person. What happens when you choose by drawing lots? Right, it's not a logical decision. You just say, okay, let's flip a penny, heads or tails. And whatever comes out, that's what we'll choose. Basically, again, begashmis, when you do drawing of lots, it means it's random. Turns out that this came out, so you're first and you're second. Or I choose you over that, only because this piece of paper came to my hands first, which means in Gashmi it's something which is lower than logic. What it represents spiritually is that it's coming from a place that's higher than logic. Just briefly, how does it affect, what does it mean that we're thanking Hashem for our lot? Again, the general explanation for that is, first of all, we thank Hashem that he gave us the Torah, gave us the mitzvahs, but then every person has their specific, unique shlichus in this world. So some people, their shlichus is to be head of a community. He's a rabbi of the whole community. One person's shlichus is to be a teacher. One person's shlichus is to be a doctor. One person's shlichus is to be a lawyer. One person's shlichus is to be a shoemaker. One person's shlichus is to be a tailor. And it's not random. This is like part of why Hashem sent his neshama down to this world. He's going to serve Hashem in this way or that way or the other way. Some people, their shlichus is to serve Hashem with wealth, and some people, their shlichus is to serve Hashem with poverty. So what it says is that these specific shlichusim that every person has, it's as if Hashem drew lots. Okay, you're going to be a tailor. Okay, you're going to be a doctor. You're going to be this. You're going to be that. What it means to say that if a person says, Hashem, I know it's important for the world to have teachers. I know it's important for the world to have doctors. I know it's important for the world to have people that are tailors, but why me? And the answer is, this is one of the things that are beyond our comprehension. Why Hashem chose me to do the shlichus, we don't know. Once He chose me to do the shlichus, then I know that I have the capacity to do it. I have the skills to do it. I have the bracha to do it and succeed at it. But why, in the first place, did Hashem choose me? It's like in an army, they'll say, you should be flying a plane, and you should be in a tank, and you should be in a submarine, and you should be in the kitchen preparing food. That's based on the people's skills and everything. But when Hashem chooses and says, you should be doing this and this is your shlichus, it's something which is only Hashem Himself knows. And even within Hashem, it's something which comes from a place which is above chokhmah, above logic. This is Hashem's essence, that He wants me to do this and this in this physical world. This is my shlichus, how I'm meant to bring godliness into this world. Yom Kippur is also a day that what we draw down into the world is coming from a place which is above limitations, above logic. A person did an Aveira, and being that they did the Aveira, therefore there are certain consequences which follow. It's a result of what I did. The fact that Hashem says, no, you can do tshuva, and whatever happened is erased as if it never happened in the world. And it's totally gone. And it doesn't matter that it happened 10 times, 20 times, 30 times, as far as I'm concerned, you did tshuva, it's gone. This is coming from a place like a miracle. It's something from a place which is not, normally you can't change the past. You can change the future, but you can't change the past. Here we are changing the past. Something was done, and whatever I did brought certain consequences, and yet through tshuva I can change it, and even though I'm going back to the past. That's because tshuva by Hashem comes from a place which is infinite, and also for the Yid, tshuva comes from the place of the neshama, which is yichidim. That's the part of the neshama that is not limited, the part of the neshama that's not affected by Aveira, part of the neshama that always remains pure and holy, and that part of the neshama transcends all the things that happen and is able to refresh the neshama and bring it back to be fully, completely pure like it was in the first place. So therefore, Yom Kippur is connected to the Ravos. And the same is with Purim. After we understand and we explain that Purim was coming from a place which is the Eibishter made a miracle that's above all miracles, a miracle that's in Melubish in Teva, and it's coming from a place which is the highest type of infinite that's also represented by Geulah. That's why it's Geulah. On a personal level, it means that this is a day, Yom Kippur and Purim are both days that the Yechida of the Neshama is more revealed. The difference is, on Yom Kippur, how does it manifest? Through tshuva, through crying, through bitterness. On Purim, how does it manifest? Through simcha, through dancing, through singing. But it's really the Yechida that's being revealed. The one thing I didn't explain, because I just think it's a little bit difficult to explain, is why Haman chose the method of Geulah. And it's explaining is how we also believe that if you go to that level, which is not limited, and therefore there's no differences there, that's the level where he can draw from there the possibility of doing what he wants to the Yidden. On the level which is logic, that Hashem will say, how do you compare your life to the life of the Yidden? They're keeping Torah, they're doing mitzvahs, they're this and they're that. So therefore there's no room for your decrees. But if you go to a place which is above that, and this is based on a lot of Maimorim that talk about, we mentioned it briefly in class in the Maimor, we also had this, that Klipa get chayas from the place which is above the limitations, and therefore they can also get chayas. And that's why Haman drew lots, hoping that through doing that, he'll draw it down. I just want to conclude by, that has to be explained. I know this is just one word, but just thought I'd throw it in. I just want to say that one of the things that happened in the history of Lubavitch was in 1953, and the other was in 1991, two major things. In 1953, the Rebbe was having a Farbrengen on Purim, and then it was like 3, 4 in the morning. The Rebbe said a mimer, and then 3, 4 o'clock in the morning, the Rebbe told a story. And the Rebbe said that when there was the revolution, was it during the revolution or during the Czar, they were, the revolution, I think, they were voting in for a new leader. So there was a chassid that he had no idea what you're supposed to do, but the Rebbe Rashab said everybody should go to vote. So he had no idea what it's about, but being that the Rebbe said to go, he basically did it like anything else the Rebbe would say to do. And he went to vote, but he didn't know what to do. So his friend showed him what you're supposed to do. After the people voted, they all shouted, hooray. But in Russia, instead of hooray, they say hurrah. So he was also shouting, but he meant it in Hebrew. Hurrah. Hurrah means he's bad. And the Rebbe was holding his hands like this. I don't know what that meant. And he moved in all 3 directions. And he said 3 times, hurrah, hurrah, hurrah. And then the Rebbe said a second mimer, which hardly ever happens. Sichas, the Rebbe speaks many sichas, but a mimer is only once. Anyway, the next day, news were coming out of Russia that something happened to Stalin. They're not sure what happened. Whether he had a stroke, he was assassinated, nobody knew exactly what happened. And a few days later, we found out that he's actually dead. Besides the fact that he was in Russia, there was something very specific that was going on at that time. And if you go online, you'll actually can read the whole story. It's called the Doctor's Plot. He made a plot which was to accuse Jewish doctors that they're poisoning people that have high positions in politics. They accused one doctor, then they accused another doctor, Jewish doctors. And then they said, this is a plan of all the Jewish doctors to poison all the political people that are in Russia. And what he did was he arrested them, and he had a whole plan, no different than Hitler. Send them off to a camp, and then take all the Jews there. Naturally, this would incite all the Russians against Jews, and eventually send them all off and do the same thing that he did. So it was very serious. A lot of doctors were arrested. After he died, a lot of the people in his government didn't agree with him, but they couldn't stand up to him. He was very aggressive, very strong. After he died, they changed it, and all the people that were arrested were released from jail to go back home, and the whole thing was dropped. So Hasidim associated what happened on Purim with the Rebbe to what happened with him. Of course, the Rebbe never acknowledged it. However, in 1991, the Maimer that the Rebbe said, which was never edited and never published, in 1991, the Rebbe edited the Maimer and it was published. Whenever they published a Maimer, they always would write a little bit of background when the Rebbe said it. In the introduction to this Maimer, they wrote, the Rebbe said this on Purim, and shortly after this, Russia was eliminated, and apparently the Maimer was associated with his elimination. The fact that the Rebbe allowed it to be printed in his Maimer was clearly the Rebbe acknowledging that that's exactly what happened. But it was 1991, and that Purim, another thing happened. That same year Purim, that's when Saddam Hussein was defeated, and that's when the miracle happened in the Persian Gulf. So based on that, we should expect a big miracle. Purim 2025. We don't have to wait till Purim. It can happen today in the merit of Purim. And we should also see a big miracle, the biggest of all. Okay, I hope that all the classes gave a little bit more of a Hasidic meaning to the Yontif. And do the best we can with it.
Was it whatever you said after said Torah, was that all King Karim?
Is that what?
Said the Mimer all King Karim?
Yeah, that's the mimer.
What's the one said before?
It's the same mimer.
Oh.
Then he said it, but it wasn't published. In 1991, the Rebbe stopped saying mimer, but instead he published mimer.
No, I thought you said before he did the thing with his hands, he said a mimer.